What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about some upcoming titles for the next few months, really, that you may or may not have missed are getting release dates or various little bits of news like that. As I was recently getting caught up with No Rest for the Wicked, I also went through a bunch of other games I'd previously taken a look at and kind of tried to get a handle on the sort of schedule that is upcoming, given that, honestly, the next couple of months are still packed with all sorts of bigger releases, so I wanted to shine a light on some of these that might have slipped by you or just haven't quite received a release date but are meant to launch in like the first half of the year as an example. But with that said, let's not waste any time and go ahead and just dive right into it. So first and foremost, we have Cyberknights Flashpoint. This is an upcoming TRPG that I've covered a couple times, as it has been in early access for a little while, but it finally has its full launch planned for May 15th, which, while being a completely different genre, probably isn't a big deal that it's releasing right next to Doom the Dark Ages, but I will say that for me personally, who plans on playing both of them, might be a little bit of a nuisance. That said, what I have played of Cyberknights Flashpoint is admittedly a little bit out of date, because since the last time I played this game, they've released something like 200 updates, which is largely because they update this game a lot. Which is good, because I'm looking forward to seeing it in a more polished state, as when I took a look at it, it was still obviously a little bit early, some of the systems weren't exactly working correctly, and hopefully they've got all that sorted out by now. Regardless of all that, what Cyberknights actually is effectively a sort of squad-based TRPG where the squad you are in control of just so happens to be a band of ne'er-do-wells out there planning heists and doing jobs for various people in this cyberpunk dystopia. Now, on one hand, this has, like, I would say pretty XCOM related things. You're going to be building up a base, getting all that done, but there's also more specific stuff to the heists themselves, like for instance actually doing all the prep and legwork that a heist may very well require, and trying to do those jobs on time before you run into problems. But ultimately, it looks neat. I'm looking forward to actually checking it out in its full version. Next up, though, in much more recent and immediate news, we have some info about Shadow of the Road. This is an upcoming sort of CRPG centered around an area of Japanese history that sees us engaging with a little bit of steampunk technology at the same time. I've talked about this one a couple times as well previously, going over a little bit of the details, but I should actually have much more to say about this one relatively soon, because it was announced that it is entering open alpha here on March 25th. And naturally, I'll be taking a look at that, as anything CRPG news is absolutely my jam, and then of course we can learn more about it. Now, I did want to mention that alpha is in fact open, so if you go to this game's Steam page, you should be able to sign up for it for yourself in what is likely to be our first sort of public look at what this game is going to be. Now, obviously that is an alpha, so the game itself still has some time in the oven before we actually see a full release, and realistically I probably wouldn't expect anything until 2026 at the earliest. But either way, expect some news from me on that here in roughly 5 or so days. Third up, we've got something a little bit different with a pixelated action adventure known as Vessels of Decay. This is due out sometime this summer. It was originally announced quite some time ago. I believe it's more or less a solo dev on this one, with its sort of official launch trailer being announced just a few days ago, though it looks like they're finally ready to bring this one across the finish line. But Vessels of Decay puts us in the role of a post-apocalyptic Scandinavia where we'll be following two siblings as they attempt to make their way through this world while engaging in combat, exploration, and all the usual jazz. But what has me especially interested in this title is actually the boss fights that it talks about. So the boss fights of this game are supposed to be these large sort of multi-stage affairs that are meant to be a bit of a spectacle in their approach. And to be honest, I'm just a big fan of the occasional bit of pixel graphics. Now that said, information on this one is a little bit scarce otherwise, but again, it should be launching this summer, so probably one of the smaller games I'll decide to take a little break and take a look at here in just a few months. But that does bring us to the last two titles on this, and these are, I would say, a little bit more well known, but nonetheless I wanted to talk about them for a couple different reasons. But I will say that these two games are slated for the first half of 2025, but ultimately don't actually have release dates at the moment. The first of those, The Altars, is one of my most anticipated games for the year, and that's pretty much because of how interesting the premise of the story for this one is. The game itself is a survival survival action adventure where we are simply going to do typical survival type stuff, I would say. But the catch is, we're essentially stranded solo on a planet that is incredibly dangerous, but the catch is, what we're actually here for, Rapidium, gives us the ability to make clones of ourselves to help each other out. And the thing is, each of these clones has a different personality from you, because you, in order to make them, alter little bits of their DNA and their past to make them a different person. And so, while you are technically arguing with yourself, you can assign yourself various tasks and stuff via this approach, and it effectively allows you to sort of, multiply your manpower, obviously. But the thing is, each of these individual clones is also like a full-blown person you have to interact with. Them happy and motivated to help you get off of this planet, ideally with your life. And it's such a wonderful premise for a story that alone is pretty much selling it for me. The survival crafting elements from the publicly available demo seem, strong enough for what the game is. But I'm infinitely more interested in the narrative and if they manage to do anything truly interesting with it. So hopefully, probably by May or the beginning of June, when they do all the announcements for everything, I would expect to hear something about this one, which is also the case for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. A game I would say probably nobody has missed, really, but what you may have missed is that this game is also supposed to be releasing in the first half of 2025, and given how Paradox, in interviews and things with the CEO and whatnot, has basically very publicly said they're growing tired of dealing with this in not so many words, I fully expect we'll get this game one way or the other. But in all seriousness, the devs leading up to the release of this version that we have now have been releasing extensive dev diaries since they, finally committed to a direction here and are actually about to see this thing across the finish line, which brings me to my main point about it, really, and that is that I think people may have missed the first half of 2025 bit largely because every time I mention this game, and all of the new details and that have been announced and everything, everybody seems to be very caught off guard by it. So what I plan to do is when we actually get a release date, which realistically is probably going to be again around May or June when they do all the shows, I plan on doing a sort of full deep dive into all the dev diaries and information they've put out there so I can compile everything that is currently up to date on this game in a single place. Because, as I basically have to mention every time I bring this game up, there's a million reasons to be skeptical about this title. I think it has a very steep hill to climb, but in everything that they have shown for this, I do think they'll nail the atmosphere, if not the story. But given just the sheer amount of, everything this game has been through, and the development woes it has experienced, whether the game is good or bad, it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out, which is what I'm here for, if nothing else. But I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this particular video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope there were some games you may or may not have heard in here. As if you needed more, given that, again, basically through May, the schedule is pretty packed yet. And I think it'll be especially interesting when the sort of dates and announcements shows right around the beginning of June roll around. Because if you look at the back half of the year, while there is plenty of stuff that's supposed to be releasing in 2025, very little of it has a release date past that point. So it's pretty wide open. And ultimately, we'll see what happens. But that's going to do it for today. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.